Good afternoon, I'm Walt Bauer, and I'd like to welcome you to the Human Development Institute's final fall seminar. We'll be hosting additional seminars in the spring, and we hope you will join us for those as well. Information will become available very soon for those seminars on our website. We have multiple sites around the state joining us this afternoon. Joining us this afternoon is all the sites have previously tested connections. We don't expect any issues, but should you need assistance, please utilize your technical support at your site. Also, please be sure that your microphones are muted. Our presenters will provide an opportunity for questions this afternoon, and we welcome any questions from all our sites. Should you have any questions about CEUs, you can contact me. I also want to remind everyone that you need to sign in at your location, and please take a moment at the conclusion of the seminar to complete our brief evaluation. It is really helpful as we plan for upcoming seminars. Now I'm going to turn things over to Katie, Wolf, Whaley, and Jeff White.
Good afternoon. What a way to start having to talk on a Friday afternoon. This afternoon we're going to present on the idea of employment first, and that it really is more than just a slogan. I think we hear that, at least we in the employment side and in other services side hear that a whole lot these days. So we're going to talk about what it means and what it can mean here in Kentucky.
My part of the presentation is talking about the road to employment first, and that's a road that we've been on in Kentucky now for going on about 2.5, 3 years. The best definition that I've been able to find of employment first comes from APSE, the Association for Persons Supporting Employment First. And that definition simply is that employment in the general workforce is the first and preferred outcome for the provision of publicly funded services for all working age citizens with disabilities, regardless of the level of disability. So there is an expectation that everyone has the ability to work, and that's what Employment First is built upon. As I said, we've been on the road to Employment First for between 2 and 3 years, and we're in good company. There are active Employment First efforts going on now in at least 44 states. In Kentucky, we are at the very verge of perhaps having an official policy in place. We have been notified by the governor's office that there is interest in either legislation or an executive order coming up as soon as this year, this upcoming year. Be sure to know that Governor Beshear is very much a supporter. The question is whether this will really fit into the plans for the last few months of his administration or not. So let's talk about what we have to believe in order for Employment First to have validity. First of all, we believe that nearly all people with disabilities can contribute to the community and in the valued social roles that they desire, given the appropriate amount of support. It's just a given to us that everyone has a role to play. We have to be committed to make sure that the folks in our programs have the level of support that's needed for them to be successful. And the two key points are that we need to provide the amount of support that is needed. To provide less than is needed is unacceptable. But by the same token, to provide more support than is needed is disrespectful. So we need to give folks the tools to be successful. We do not need to push beyond the ability and the desire that they have. So Employment First in Kentucky, we've spent a fair amount of time coming up with a statement. And in Kentucky, we do things a little differently. So in Kentucky, we're actually working on employment and education first. And our statement is that for persons with disabilities receiving assistance from publicly funded systems who wish to work or further their education at a college or university to improve their options for work, then employment in the general workforce in typical work settings, working side by side with people without disabilities, earning regular wages and benefits, and being part of the economic mainstream of our society should be the first and preferred option. In the one basic statement we can make is that employment and education first really means real jobs, for real wages. Okay? So that is the statement that we have agreed upon that we're beginning to work on. In order for Employment First to happen, a lot of different changes have had to occur. We have had changes in public policy, changes in innovation and practice, and changes in expectations. Some of the public policy changes we've seen, the most important legislation for people with disabilities, the Americans with Disabilities Act back in 1990. When that act was passed, I actually worked in Virginia in the outskirts of Washington, D.C., and was able to be slightly involved in that process. And it was so interesting to see the collaboration between really the government society, government offices, the agencies that were involved, and business. Business was ready for the Americans with Disabilities Act to happen. Followed that with the Americans with the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that has set the stage for our transition efforts. Ticket to Work, Workforce Investment Act, Olmstead, old changes in the RSA regulations that required that employment outcomes have to be in integrated settings. CMS suggestions on waiver service definitions. Recently, executive orders and new employment requirements for federal contractors. CMS's final rule on home and community-based services. Many of you are aware that we're preparing a transition plan to go into effect. And WIOA earlier this year. So a great deal has happened. More is happening. Something really interesting happened this past Wednesday. We'll talk a little bit later, called the ABLE Act. It's the beginnings of movement toward a really new and innovative and fantastic opportunity. Innovations in practice. Well, we had a pretty strong movement from medical models to social models, particularly through waiver programming. We began to see things funded like supported employment and other things that are not traditionally a medical offering. In the 1980s, the emergence of supported employment in Kentucky was a leader in supported employment back in the 80s. Many of you remember Carol Estes, and some of the other folks that worked for VR. Many great things happened with supported employment in Kentucky. Then waivers became available, and guess what? There was less difficult money to support folks, to be honest. Day programming provided an opportunity for folks to do something during the day that was less staff involved, and that grew at a tremendous rate. As we began looking at work in general, we were in a situation of train in place, where folks would go into a facility and they would be trained for a time, and eventually they may or may not go out into the workforce. And that began to move back to place and train, which is how the general population tends to learn jobs. 1980s, we began to see the expanded use of what we call natural supports now, where folks get support on the job in the same means that other employees get support on the job. Mental health opportunities, employment is part of recovery. In Kentucky, the development of the Dartmouth model, I guess we're calling it IPS now, individual planning and support, and it's tremendous success. And it's been expanded now throughout all 14 CMHC areas. Innovation and technology has made a tremendous difference. Transition practices, the whole aspect of self-determination has really begun to move things forward. Changes in the workplace, allowing more flexibility, diversity, and universal design. So all these things have kind of changed together to create a wonderful environment for employment. Changes in expectations. When I was growing up, very few people with disabilities really had an expectation that they would work in the community. Their families had no expectation typically that they would work in the communities. I had a first cousin who was deaf and had, at that time we called it mental retardation, now we call it intellectual disabilities. We had no expectation that she would work in the community. Wow, were we ever wrong? She worked for a span of time in a shelter workshop until that workshop closed. Then she began to work in the factory for the contractor for whom she was doing work in the shelter workshop. It's just tremendous, tremendous changes. Disability is no longer seen as an insurmountable barrier to employment. Folks with disabilities can and do work in every facet of our community. So our expectations are changing across the board with families, public policy, society, everything. So we have a perfect situation now to begin moving forward with Employment First. So, as I told you, we're on the verge of heading formally down that road, but really having an Employment First law or an Employment First executive order means very little if you don't have the structure in place for it to have meaning. So we've been working for several years now at trying to define what Employment First will look like in Kentucky. So our areas of emphasis are asset management, economic self-sufficiency being acknowledged as a priority in policies and procedures. Any of you who have been involved with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation lately understands that there is a tremendous movement toward asset development being led by OVR. And we now have a situation where folks are beginning to develop a financial identity. And that is so important in today's world as you move forward. So that moving that forward for our folks is a huge priority. We want to make sure that there are people at the local and regional level who are responsible for managing the development of employment services. We've been working very closely with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation and the supported employment counselors, and are beginning to do some work together directly with providers in the area of utilization management, utilization review, and beginning to do some cross-training so that we can, again, work even more closely together. And so the providers will know there are folks out there that they can contact for assistance with employment. Rates and rate structures. Most of you who have been involved in waiver services understand that we have had a change in rates for the SCL waiver. The disappointing fact is that we have not had a change in rate structure for the Michelle P. waiver. In reality, the previous rate, the current Michelle P. rate, does not allow providers, in my opinion at least, to provide supported employment at a rate that will cover their expenses. So any provider who is providing supported employment to folks on Michelle P. is doing so by subsidizing that activity from the funds that they receive from other activities. That is a situation that we hope very much will change in the near future. We're in the final month of implementation of SCL2. So the SCL rate at the end of December will have doubled, essentially, for every person receiving supported employment. It is our sincere hope that that same thing will happen with Michelle P. very soon, because providers need to at least be able to cover their costs, and the SCL2 rate essentially is designed to do that. All appropriate folks need to be educated about employment, and we began with the help of APSE down that road this year with the Take Your Legislator to Work activities. Wasn't as well attended as we would have liked to have seen. But again, our legislators, our executive staff, and our administrators need to know about employment and what employment should look like just as much as our staff who are providing employment supports. Okay? It's a huge... The changes we have made in employment services are really a rather huge undertaking, and we have got to be able to provide adequate technical assistance and training to folks who are out there doing the hard work. And I will tell you that in my humble opinion, no one does it better than the Human Development Institute here at UK. We have folks coming from many other states to receive support employment training from our folks here. And we really couldn't be more proud of the product that they make available to folks. We need to continue that, but we need to also reach out to the staff members with the bodies that are administering the funds and other staff within the agencies that are providing support, so that everyone has an accurate understanding of what employment services need to look like in Kentucky. We need to have data collected and used to inform our strategies. Right now, we do not. We have made some efforts in that direction, but we need to step back and try and revise those efforts. Right now, we really have no idea how many folks are actually working across the board in supported employment in Kentucky. We've tried to estimate, we've tried to come up with numbers, and we just simply can't do that. So we need to actually put a data system in place, and we're beginning to work on that. Case management service coordination process, employment services has the primary goal for the person, assuming that the person wants to work. We have no desire to try and force someone who doesn't work into the workforce. But for those who do wish to work, we believe that should be the first and primary activity that they're taking part in their plan of care. And we need to have case managers and support brokers who understand that expectation and that necessity. And we need to plan for performance measurement and quality assurance that includes the publishing of data on employment outcomes. And we have some of that. The IPS program has a fidelity scale that is pretty impressive. We're beginning to expand that fidelity scale beyond the IPS program to other programs. And with the SCL waiver, we're putting in place quality indicator tools that will actually measure the person's progress upon the outcome model. So as we begin to glean data from those kinds of activities, we'll be far better informed about how things are going. So why is employment first important to Kentucky? Well, you can look at it from a couple of different directions. One is a social services perspective, and the other is an economic perspective. And it's kind of important that we're able to communicate from both perspectives. Okay? So from a social services perspective, we know for a fact that the workforce participation rate for folks with disabilities is about a third of folks without disabilities. That means about 1/3 of the total number of folks with disabilities are working as compared to the number of folks without disabilities. That is a meaningful number. Unemployment rate is not a meaningful number, if you haven't already figured that out. Unemployment rate just is a measure of how many folks who are looking for work are unable to find work at any given point in time. The participation rate is very, very important, and we're lagging behind for people with disabilities. This is a very serious issue. Right now, we have about 13 million adults of working age who are receiving supports through Social Security and SSI. 13 million adults of working age who want to work, many of them, but either because of myths, don't believe that they can work, or because of a lack of opportunity are not working. So we need to change that. It's been continuously shown, without question, that folks, if they have assistance, accommodation, and encouragement, can work and can be very successful. I see it every day. I'm fortunate that my brother-in-law, who's a person with a disability, works with me every day and loves his job and does a great job. So I know for a fact that people with disabilities can do the work, and do the work as well as folks without disabilities in many, many cases. They just need support, training, and a little understanding. The Martin School at the University of Kentucky some time ago conducted some research based upon the results of the National Core Indicators, and they determined pretty clearly that employment is a linchpin service for people with disabilities. The NCI data showed without question that folks who were employed were happier than folks who were not employed. Folks who were employed were healthier than folks who were not employed. And folks who were employed were less lonely. Those are very important facts that we need to keep in mind, because if folks are happy, healthy, and not lonely, what does that mean? That means they're less likely to have behavioral issues. They're less likely to be expensive to support in the community. So by helping folks join the workforce, we can actually help them live a better life and a happier life. So let's look at it from an economic perspective. It really and truly can be a road out of poverty. Working age adults with disabilities live below the poverty line at twice the rate of folks without disabilities. That's census data. Mathematical Policy Research, which is the agency that does work for Social Security, tells us that 2/3 of folks in long-term poverty are people with disabilities. So if we're going to move forward, we need to address these facts, and Employment First will allow us to do that. Cost effectiveness. Well, there's a fellow up at Kent State University named Robert Chimera who's done a lot of really interesting economic research on employment. And he has determined, without question, that employment services is the least costly means of integrating folks into the community. In one study, he found that the total cost per hour of day activities was $17.01, while the total cost per hour of employment was $11.81. Now, we do have a higher rate for employment, but folks who are employed and properly employed are not supervised 100% of the time by a staff member, while folks in day programming are supervised 100% of the time by a staff member. So the total cost in comparison was $17.01 for day programming and $11.81 for employment. The second study that was done concurrently, it was determined supported employment was 65.9% less to provide than other day activities. So it makes economic sense from an economic effectiveness basis. From a cost efficiency basis, which actually is a little more important than effectiveness, he found that in measuring the real dollar benefit of folks with disabilities on public assistance who entered the workforce, he found that on average, every dollar spent to provide support employment to folks returned $1.46 per hour. So not per hour, per dollar. So you spend $1 for support employment, society is going to gain back $1.46. Okay? And that's on average. Even folks with multiple disabilities were found to return $1.19 for every dollar invested. So it is an investment. It's not an expense. It's an investment. We as a society are always going to be better off for getting folks into employment. So we've had some successes. I mentioned before Kentucky's IPS program. The outcomes from the IPS program are absolutely fantastic. It works predominantly with folks with mental health issues and with substance abuse issues. The outcomes are tremendous, absolutely tremendous, and we're learning a great deal about the way that they are successful and trying to apply it to other areas. And much to my surprise, when you look at National Core Indicators data from November 2011 through 2013, it appears that the number of folks with developmental and intellectual disabilities working in the community in Kentucky has doubled. That's what we expected to happen by the end of 2015. Now, that's a little sad to me because the reason for that is we had so few people actually working in the community prior to 2011. But nonetheless, it is a success. And we have a lot of folks who have been working with us really, really hard to try and make things happen. And you'll see them up here on the screen. There's room for other folks to be involved. And we would very much like to have other folks involved. So if you're part of an organization who would like to become involved with us as we make Employment First a reality in Kentucky, please get in touch with me and let me know. There is plenty of room and plenty of work to go around. Looking into the future. So what can we do today to help folks move toward self-sufficiency? Well, one of the things we can do is we can lobby Congress for a change in the SSI resource limitations. They have been at $2,000 and $3,000 since 1989, I think. It's been a long, long time, 24 years without change. And that still is an important number. I'm sure that most folks in here have heard about the ABLE Act, Achieving a Better Life Experience Act. And this is dated information because on Wednesday, the ABLE Act actually passed through the House with 404 votes in support. 17 votes against, 13 folks not voting. So it was a tremendous first step. There are more steps to come, potentially and hopefully a vote in the Senate next week. Again, we do have, actually I believe it's now 76 co-sponsors in the Senate. Rand Paul still is not a co-sponsor. He's the only member of our delegation who is not. But he does claim to be a supporter of it, which is good. So we'll see what happens when the vote comes down. Now, the ABLE Act is a wonderful opportunity for folks to begin to do some more significant long-term financial planning, and we really haven't had the opportunity for some of that to occur. The ABLE Act, though, will do a couple of things. It will make the money put into the accounts tax-free up to $100,000, and it will seclude and not. It will ensure that money that's put into an ABLE account will not impact benefits. Okay, those are great things. That's all it will do on the federal level. Implementation and how things are actually structured are left to the state. So when it passes, and I'm going to be very positive and say that it's going to pass, I hope. When it does pass, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of work to do because it would be a real shame if we couldn't get an implementation plan in place and get this implemented at the earliest possible date. So we're looking forward to that. Now, with that said, ABLE Act is a tool. There are other tools out there that are still equally important. Special needs trusts, pooled income funds, because there's certain types of income that won't work in an ABLE account. ABLE account can't deal with real property, can it? Special needs trust can. And there are also some uses of funds that that won't be allowed from an ABLE account that will be allowed from special needs trust. So it's an additional tool. It's part of really 3 tools that we have to help folks do long-range financial planning. So understand that, and understand that there are still needs for the other tools. We need to be very upfront with folks and help them understand the planning process. Okay? One other thing we can do. Recent changes by CMS allow the establishment of Medicaid waiver programs across disability groups. In the past, we have always had to have programs for a specific disability group. Now we can have something called an I waiver, and an I waiver is, in essence, a SPI, a state plan amendment. So it would be possible for us to pull supported employment out of SCL, Michelle P., ABI, everything else that's in, and establish an employment-only I waiver to expand the availability of long-term supports to other folks. That's one of the big needs of the IPS program, because we can help folks get jobs, but it's helping them keep the jobs that's the challenge. Okay? So what would have to happen for this to work is we would have to set up certain eligibility requirements for the I waiver. Okay? We could not afford to make employment services available to every single person receiving Medicaid services, because frankly every single person receiving Medicaid services doesn't need employment services. So we need to carefully define the population that we would be serving through an I waiver and put the program in place so that we can have consistent employment programming across the board. That is the important key. That way we can all coordinate with OVR and make sure that folks are not left out in the cold. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking forward to in the future. By how far down the road, I don't know. But I do believe that it is a real possibility for us as long as we can structure it in a method that we can afford. And that is very important. Very important, because we always have to pay attention to the cost of what we're doing. We have to make sure that the benefit at least equals the cost. Okay.